Good morning. I'm Emanuele Di Lorenzo from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and the short title for my project is Pacific Decadal Variability in a Changing Climate. This is work with co-PIs Niklas Schneider, Kim Cobb, Bruce Anderson, and Dan Bymont, and NOAA collaborator Mike Alexander and Matt Newman. Central to our proposal is the question, is Pacific decadal variability altered by climate change, and how? To address this question, we're going to be using AR4 and AR5 climate model simulations, as well as paleo multi-proxy reconstructions, and when needed, targeted climate model experiments. In order to proceed, we have to develop an initial hypothesis or working model of the dynamics that explain most of the Pacific decadal variance. And this model is necessary to evaluate the climate models and also will provide us the basis to expand our understanding of the climate dynamics of the Pacific. So briefly speaking, I'd like to introduce the model. We are going to have a tropical ocean or a tropical system and an extratropical mid-latitude system. In the tropics, the ocean and atmosphere are tightly coupled. In the extratropics and mid-latitude, the ocean is forced by the atmosphere. Now we know from theoretical studies that in a tropical equatorial basin, there are two dynamical modes of variability, a zonal mode and a meridional mode, and that these modes emerge also statistically as the first and second empirical orthogonal function EOFs of the basin. Now for the Pacific basin, these two modes map nicely into the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or the canonical form of ENSO, or the other Central Pacific warming or non-canonical ENSO that has been recently talked about. Now we will assume that these two modes in the tropics, although they interact, they will each have distinct teleconnections to the extratropics into the first and second leading mode of atmospheric variability, and that this atmospheric variability generates an ocean response in the first and second mode of the extratropical ocean. Now this bridge will essentially integrate the decadal variance of the tropics into low frequency variance in the North Pacific Ocean in this particular example. So if you look at ENSO, we know that ENSO has teleconnections to the extratropics through the PNA pattern, and that the expression, surface expression of the PNA pattern is the Aleutian low mode, and that the Aleutian variability also drives the first mode of the North Pacific, which is referred to as the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. If you look at the second system, we know that the second leading mode of atmospheric variability is the North Pacific Oscillation. Now this particular link has been described at the low frequency by various studies. If you look at the second system, we know that the second leading mode of atmospheric variability is the North Pacific Oscillation, or NPO, and that the NPO has been recently recognized to have an oceanic expression in the North Pacific Gyro Oscillation, or NPGO. The NPGO tracks decadal fluctuations in the gyroscale circulation and has been linked to dominant long-term changes in salinity and nutrients of the North Pacific, as well as a variety of ecosystem species, including salmon. So the question then is there a link between the Central Pacific warming and the NPGO? And this is when our project started. And so our first step was to ask the question, is the NPGO the decadal expression of the Central Pacific warming in the same way as the PDO is often referred to as the decadal expression of the El Niño Southern Oscillation? To address this question, we used a general circulation model of the atmosphere. And the model is set up in such a way that we have prescribed forcing of sea surface temperatures between 12 south and 12 north at the equator, and we run this prescribed SST from 1950 to 2008. This particular integration and outside the tropics, we have a mixed layer model where the ocean and the atmosphere are able to interact. Now this particular forcing cycle is repeated 40 times to generate an ensemble from which to gain statistical confidence. Now for each of the ensemble members, we correlate the model NPO with the tropical sea surface temperature so that we can extract the pattern of sea surface temperature that drives variations in the NPO in the extratropics. So here is the pattern of correlation that comes from averaging all the correlation pattern of each realization of the model. And we'll refer to this as the NPO SSTA forcing pattern. The correlations here have maximum loading in the Central Tropical Pacific, and these correlations are all significant given that we have integrated in our correlation average both the signal and the noise of each of the ensembles. If we now compare this particular pattern of correlation with the Central Pacific warming or non-canonical El Nino, and we focus in the tropical region, we find that the two patterns are essentially very similar. In fact, from a statistical and also both spatial and temporal variability are almost identical. The next thing that we can do, we can also extract the NPO ensemble average, that is the fraction of the NPO variability that is common to all model and can be therefore ascribed as the deterministic fraction. If we integrate the NPO index, then we obtain a more low frequency time series, which in some sense, if you think of the NPGO is integrating the NPO. So this integration of the NPO is really a reconstruction of the NPGO index from the ensemble average, which can be compared to the true NPGO index to find significant correlation of 0.55. These are monthly time series. This correlation is mostly dominated by the low frequency variance, and this is a low pass at 8-year of the two time series, which show a correlation again of 0.85, which is extremely significant beyond the 99% level, even including considering the few degrees of freedom of this data. So going back to the diagram in question, is the NPGO the decadal expression of the CPW? The answer is that there are strong suggestions that this is indeed the case, and there was a study published by the PI last year. Now this particular blue loop here has also important implication because previous studies have shown that the NPO and NPGO high frequency variability can excite meridional mode dynamics, which has a Central Pacific warming expression in the early spring summer, which can then trigger an El Nino southern oscillation, as being documented in a series of studies by Weimont, Anderson, and also Alexander more recently. We also know that the Central Pacific warming pattern of the meridional mode not always triggers an El Nino activity, but can also trigger just a Central Pacific warming or non-canonical ENSO. Now, although these teleconnection between tropics and extratropics have been discussed in terms of a high-frequency link and a low-frequency link, the mechanism behind these connections are timescale independent, hence suggesting that this particular feedback loop could actually occur on different timescales and hence provide an increased memory of the coupled system, which can lead to more low-frequency variance. And this particular dynamics are currently being investigated with a couple climate models within the project. So given that we have this dynamical or conceptual model for Pacific decadal dynamics, we can ask the question, how do the AR4 models capture these Pacific decadal modes and their connections in their controlled simulations? So let's begin testing our Pacific model, and let's focus first on the decadal modes in the North Pacific, like PDO and PGO. And the way we tested the models was not just to look at the individual expressions of the oceanic and atmospheric modes, but also to verify the extent to which the PDOs and the NPGOs of the model are in fact the response to the Aleutian low and the NPO. I don't have time to go into the details of the results, but in summary, all models seem to capture pretty well the Aleutian low PDO mode, and to some extent also the NPO and PGO, although they have more trouble in capturing the second mode. Now what I'd like to focus instead is the fact that when we analyzed the models, none of the models showed a connection between tropics and extratropics at the low frequency. So in other words, at the decadal scale, the tropics and extratropics are decoupled in these models. Now this decoupling has been already discussed in some literature concerning the El Nino Southern Oscillation link to the Aleutian low and PDO. We just documented the fact that also in this second system, including CPW, NPO, and PGO, these links are also non-existent. Now one possible explanation is that the Central Pacific warming pattern of this model is not quite the same as the observation. So here is now an ensemble mean of the Central Pacific warming pattern that emerges as the second dominant mode of variability of the tropics for these models, which in this case was extracted using a combined EOF analysis of the ocean and atmosphere. So this is the Central Pacific warming pattern. We can compare it to observations. We can look at the center of actions, and we find that the model's center of action is typically displaced far to the east with respect to the observations. Now this displacement has implications on the teleconnections to the extratropics. So here, for example, is a map of sea level pressure, and this is the sea level expression of the Central Pacific warming pattern in the ensemble mean of these models. You can see here the signature of the Rossby wave to the extratropics at the surface. And if we compare again this with the observation pattern, which shows a clear NPO signature here, and we look at the center of actions of the model here in red, we find that the center of action of the model is displaced with respect to the observation, almost falls orthogonal to the observations. So obviously this is something that needs to be addressed in terms of the realism of the climate models. Going back to our analysis, though, of this diagram in the IPCC models, we can still ask the question, what changes do the AIR4 model predict in the future scenarios, in this case the A1B scenario? And the answer is that models are inconsistent in predicting changes in the decadal modes, both for the spatial and structure and also in frequency. However, it is unclear if these predictions are meaningful, given that the low frequency dynamics of the tropics and extratropics are decoupled. We're still working on this was just a preliminary analysis that was published this year in Furtado et al., and we're continuing these analyses in more depth. We can still then ask a question, what do observations tell us about the impact of climate change on the decadal modes? Now, there's been reported that the low-frequency variance explained by this system, the Central Pacific Warming NPO-NPGO system, has increased since the 1980s. In fact, there was a study by Yi et al. Published in 2009 that suggested that the Central Pacific Warming variance is increasing as a result of climate change. And this was an analysis done with a couple climate models in the tropics. So we decided to pursue this question as a group, and so we asked, is the variance of the CPW, NPO, and PGO increasing as a result of climate change? Now, to address this question, we used a variety of approaches. One approach is to use paleoproxy reconstructions of the Central Pacific warming. And so we used a coral proxy from the Atoll of Palmyra, which was published by one of the co-PIs, Cobb. This proxy contains variations of the Central Pacific warming, but cannot distinguish between variations in salinity or variation in sea surface temperature. So we developed then a new proxy, the strontium calcium. It's not a new proxy, but it's been around in the community. But this allows us to divide the variability of this particular proxy into the contribution of SST and the contribution of sea surface salinity. If we look at the salinity, we find a clear trend in the proxy, but this trend is not evident in the SST. Now, the SST proxy is dominated by low-frequency variations, and if we compare this to the NPGO index, which is the decadal variance of the CPW, we find that this proxy tracks the decadal variations extremely well, with correlation of 0.85. Given the high fidelity of this proxy, we can then look at variability in the proxy of SST back in the 1900 and find that there are large fluctuations in amplitude of the CPW, hence suggesting that increases or changes in variance in the modern time are perhaps part of the natural range of variability. So to the question, is the variance of CPW, NPO, and PGO increasing as a result of climate change? This first approach that was published by Nurhati et al. Suggests that, it's not a result of climate change, or at least we cannot detect that signal yet. A similar analysis and similar result was also obtained in a study by co-PIs Newman and Alexander, where they used a linear modeling multivariate red noise approach to show that the changes in CPW recently observed are part of stationary statistics. In other words, they're not statistically significant. I know there are other studies that have looked at different things, but so far these findings suggest that the increase in CPW, NPO, and PGO variance is not statistically significant. So to summarize our research activities, we have expanded our understanding of the decadal coupling between tropics and extratropics and developed a low-order model of Pacific decadal variability, which in a study that we're currently completing, we can show explains about 60 to 80% of the decadal variability of the North Pacific. We also have begun to test the low-order model in the AR4 simulations and isolate some problematic issues in the climate model representations of the decadal climate. More noticeably, the teleconnections from the tropics to extratropics, specifically the ones associated with the Central Pacific warming pattern, which basically what is telling us that these models have to try to resolve the Central Pacific warming the same, it's all equally critical as the El Niño Southern Oscillation. We have also explored the changes in the recent statistics of CPW using linear inverse models and paleo multi-proxy reconstructions. We intend to continue our multi-proxy reconstruction of Central Pacific warming variability in the progress of the project. Now, the material presented today is available as science contributions of our project, which are listed here, and we also have other contributions that are not yet complete, which are available on our project website, which is listed here. Thank you very much.